right. Well, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you for coming today.
Oh, anytime.
Okay. I have a couple questions I want to ask you about the Common Core. First of all, the Common Core is a paradigm shift from the way we have been doing math. What do you think is the biggest shift for teachers?
I think the biggest shift for the teachers, especially, and I'm talking elementary level, is really understanding that some of the skills have been moved up or down a grade, and then adhering to it. You know, whether it's when, a kindergarten teacher understanding that we don't have the calendar time, the money time anymore in the Common Core, and that if it's really important to you, fit it in somewhere else, but we now are adhering to a new set of standards, building rigor, fluency, and conceptual understanding, and we have to stick with the new program. We can't bring the old into it.
I think that's really true. I was just talking with a kindergarten teacher the other day about calendar time and what that looks like now in terms of being driven by the standards. And the teacher was saying that, I don't want to let go of money and I don't want to let go of time, and that's where they learn some foundational things. And I'm like, well, you don't have to give up calendar time, but you have to think about what skills are kids supposed to know and how do we integrate that into calendar time. And I think that whole thing is like a big thing for teachers. And getting people to let go of stuff. So another thing that comes up actually that has to do with calendar time is that kindergarten teachers used to spend so much time on patterns, and they don't want to let that go, but it's not part of the Common Core curriculum anymore. And so getting them to see, well, you could still do patterns, you could do those in calendar time, so that kids kind of recognize pattern and number, but that you're not spending units of study on that. I think that is a really big shift for teachers, letting go of the old and embracing the new, and really seeing the meaningfulness of it.
I think even for myself, when I first saw what was moving between grades, I was resistant myself. I was like, oh no, how can they do that? No, that's not possible. I had time to let it marinate and to grow on me. And again, knowing that, okay, there may be some things that you can find a way through games or through conversation to bring to the students, especially if it's really important to you, but still adhering to the units that are now in the Common Core. And that really is a big shift. I think it's a big shift for everybody.
Absolutely. And I think this whole idea of depth, getting teachers to really realize that we're really going for a depth, and if kids really understand number in the primary grades, when they get to third grade and patterns are introduced, the kids are ready for it, and they can really do a whole bunch of stuff that they weren't really able to do in kindergarten with that. So I think that is a huge shift, and I think that teachers and schools have to have a lot of conversations about that.
Definitely.
Right? Yes, so that it looks the same horizontally, right? And people aren't kind of in their classroom on their own, just kind of trying to figure it out.
Right.
All right. The next question I want to ask you is, what do you find are some of the major challenges of implementing the Common Core, just in general?
I think when we first got a template from our state about what introducing the Common Core for us would look like, we were breaking it up into segments. So one year it would be K through 2, the next year it would be 3 through 5 in high school, and then finally the middle school grades. So when we got the framework with what we needed to work with in the time frame, looking at our resources and finding out what do we need to do to be in compliance with the Common Core. So that was for us looking at our professional development. How can we bring information to the teachers and the administration in a timely fashion so they know what to look for, as well as making sure they understand what the gaps were now between the old standards and the new standards. That would be one thing. Looking at your resources, making sure your curriculum is in alignment with the new standards, make sure all your resources are now aligned with the Common Core. And professional development. Where can we go to find someone to come in, or a group of people to come in and help us make sure teachers understand the new 8 math practices, which have been in the NCTM, but we're pushing forward in the Common Core. What are the 6 elements of the math shifts? What are your critical areas now for your grade level? Those are all things that we need to look at to make sure that we were prepared to move our students into the new Common Core standards.
Right. I think that is so true. And really, I'm always telling teachers, like, do you know what your critical areas are? That whole thing around the critical areas and it being like about 70% of the time that you spend in the school year, I think is really important. And I think people still kind of walk around looking at the standards piece by piece, but not really thinking about what are the major shifts, right? And what are the critical areas in this grade? What should we really be spending a lot of time on? What does it look like across routines and energizers and all that kind of stuff? I think that's a big challenge to get people on board with that. And I think there needs to be more horizontal conversations as well as vertical conversations, so people know, oh, this is what we did in this grade, and this is how you're continuing that conversation, so that there's coherence, right, vertically as well as horizontally.
And developing for us the rigor within our math block has been one of, I guess, the biggest challenges. That's the new thing that everybody's looking for, rigor. And in it, in the math shifts, you have the application, fluency, the conceptual understanding. What are we doing with our time to make sure that we're really adhering to that and making the most out of our math lesson?
I think that whole thing about rigor, too, is really important. Getting people to kind of implement that. Like, what does it really look like? What did it look like before, and what does it look like now? How do we actualize, or implement rigor, right? And I think that's not something that just happens. I think, again, it's a lot of conversation, and it's going back to finding the time to have those conversations.
A lot of conversation, a lot of professional development, really having a good rubric yourself in, as a teacher, as an administrator, as I'm going in and looking in a classroom. What am I expecting? How do we measure rigor?
Right. I think that's one of the biggest questions, is what does rigor look like in the Common Core, and how do we measure it? Right? And having a definition that everybody agrees with, that everybody's on the same page. I think that's why rubrics are so important, right? Because they allow everybody to have a shared conversation and ensure that we're all talking about the same thing.
I think that one of the things that we've benefited with working with you is that we've come up with templates and frameworks of what does rigor look like, what are the elements of the Common Core at our grade level, what is that critical area, and understanding how to manage the time between it so that the teacher really has something tangible that they can use to make sure that they're meeting the requirements in the classroom. And when we've done professional development, all of them have come out saying, hey, this is great, this is hands-on, this is what we've needed, this has really benefited us because we can go right back to the class and use it immediately. We know what to look for, we're comfortable with it. And the way you are with the teachers, which I absolutely love, is that you're very unassuming. So the teachers feel very comfortable coming to you and the other people in your group and saying, hey, I don't understand this. Can you work with me on this? Can you show me? And that's very important because, a lot of our general ed teachers, our K-5 population, have low dispositions towards math. And we want them to be able to come and share that and let us know that's what we're here for. How can we help you? Because we're really trying to meet all the requirements, again, of Common Core and bring the best of it to our students.
Right, absolutely. What is some advice that you would give to districts trying to really kind of walk this path and implement the Common Core?
I guess the big things are, again, look at your curriculum. Make sure it's in alignment with the requirements of the Common Core. Look at your resources. If your book series that you use to support your math instruction is out of alignment with the Common Core, what are they doing to help bring it within alignment? You don't have to buy a new book series. Quiet as kept, they don't want you to think that. But again, your book series is not your curriculum. It supports your curriculum.
Right.
So look at what materials you have and make sure that, again, it's in alignment with, the Common Core standards for your state. Providing the professional development, really look and see where your areas of weakness are. What support systems do you need to put in for the teachers? Make sure you get your administrators trained so that they know what to look for when they're going into the classroom. Those are all big components of really getting prepared. And I would also say this would probably be a number 4. Look at your time period that you're dedicating to your math block.
Absolutely.
Is it 45 minutes? Is it 60? In our district, it's 90. What are you saying about instruction in math in your district and the importance that it is to you so that you're really meeting all the requirements and giving your students the best of what you can for sound instruction?
I think that's so key. I go to a lot of districts and their math block is like 30 or 40 minutes and their literacy block is like 2 hours. And I'm always wondering, like, what message does that send, right? And especially now that we're trying to implement the Common Core, how are you going to get everything done in 30 or 40 minutes, right? So I'm always saying there should be some sort of equity, right, between what happens in math class. If we want people to really do math workshop, then we have to give them time to do that, right? And to fill those gaps. I want you to talk a little bit about filling the gaps because I think that's another big challenge that people have. So can you talk a little bit about that?
When we found out what grade levels were going to be moving to the Common Core and when, one of the problems was the old standards, the new standards, and the gap in skills. So we had to look at ways that we could fill in the gaps. So with our collegial partners, we were able to come up with like the template of what things will be missing as we move from grade to grade. Okay, now let's look at our math block. Let's look at our time periods that we can bring this to the students so that we can fill and bridge that gap. So once we had that defined, we were able to use our after-school programs, our summer programs. We have a 90-minute block, so we have time for our whole group instruction, and then we have centers. So we were able to use our centers not only for RTI support, but also, again, bridging that gap between the old and the new standards. And that's something you really have to look at because, you know, your students are going to come into that new grade and be tested on skills that they may or may not have had in the previous year.
Absolutely. I think everybody's trying to figure out what to do with the gap, but I think you've given us some good ideas. The before school stuff, the after school stuff, the in between, right? Filling that gap is really important, and we're going to be wrestling with that for a couple of years until we catch up, right? Until the kindergartners are then fourth graders, but they've been through the Common Core for that many years, right? Another thing that we haven't talked about yet, but that I think is really important is the parent element. Right, getting parents on board, because a lot of what's in the Common Core is as unfamiliar as it is to teachers. It's even that more unfamiliar to parents. And so, what are your thoughts about that?
One of the things that we did with your assistance, we came up with a checklist on what are the skills that are required for the Common Core, and the students, it's like an I know checklist. So it's really an awesome tool that the students can use as a conference with a teacher. It's something that can be sent home with a parent. It's something that the teacher can use as a checklist. Let me make sure I taught these skills. So that was one way we were able to get the information to the parents. We were able to do broadcasts on our district website on what changes would be coming up for the Common Core. So we were able to put out little bulletins, what to expect, what to look for, what to ask for from the school as far as support. We also have a parent center where we were able to provide resources and conversations with parents that came to meetings on the Common Core. So you definitely want to make sure that all your stakeholders are on board with the changes that are going on with, we're not just math and literacy, ELA, in the changes in the Common Core as they're being implemented in the district.
Right, absolutely. All right, one other thing that makes me think of is the intersection of ELA with the Math Common Core, because the Math Common Core now is really requiring kids to think and express themselves on paper, right? To read, write, speak, listen, math, right? And there is a big emphasis on kids being able to read each other's arguments. Not only listen and speak about them, but being able to read them and then counter-argue in writing. So what do you see districts needing to do to help teachers see that intersection between ELA and math?
One of the things we've been trying to do is making sure that our students are journaling and they're really writing about it, providing them with a rubric of what is looked for what are they looking for when they have open-ended questions, understanding the writing, giving them feedback, projecting, this is a 3, this is a 2, this is a 1, making sure that again that they can defend what they're thinking, not only orally but in writing. So that's where I see that intersection of your ELA and your math, using the stories, using the books that are math related. I'm very big on literature in mathematics, and I always love to start out, especially a new skill, if I can find a book that I can bring to the students, like a little cute little story that open up the skill. So using as much literature, using as much writing, using as much feedback as possible, to me that's a good way of looking at that intersection between ELA and the math and the writing and the journaling. We took the math journaling. I think you had suggested, just looking at journaling and breaking up a book so that we had, their writing, their thinking, their definitions, words, things that they could really look at that were tangible, that they can go back and reference to. Another thing that we've been bringing to them is like the terms, vocabulary, and they have like a 4-square. I forget what it's called because I know
the Freire model.
Yeah. And so they write down the word, they write down the definition, they model it, and then again they write a little sentence or something about it. So again, they're going through and they're really defining it for themselves, and again the writing and sharing it with a partner.
Absolutely. Well, I think that concludes our discussion today.
Sure.
Thank you so much for being here with me.
Oh, anytime. Thank you so much.
All right.